Thanks for joining me for episode 27 of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. This is the fourth episode of season 2, and I'll be joined by blended learning specialist Marcia Kish to talk about student ownership of learning and student ownership of the learning environment, as well as how to find the sweet spot between too much tech and student ownership. We'll chat about Seesaw, Google Forms, school Twitter accounts, roller coasters, noodle hair, and more.
Hi, I'm Kim Lapre from the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Hello, duct tapers! Welcome in. Thank you for tuning in today. It means so much to me that you're joining me once again today. Well, I say once again, but hopefully there are a few newbies out there. Paul West pointed out in the Twitter chat last week that many of the duct tapers are tech coaches and tech leaders, but we need more classroom teachers. So he challenged the chatters to recommend this show to some classroom teachers. And so maybe some of you are the classroom teachers that have been roped in. So if you're one of those folks, let me share a bit with you about our little show. This podcast comes out every Wednesday. Well, first, my name is Jake. I guess I start with that. My name is Jake, and I am the host here of Educational Duct Tape, a podcast, which comes out every other Wednesday. Each episode will start with me yammering about some stuff, then stepping up on my proverbial soapbox to share some of my thoughts about EdTech integration. Proverbial? Wait, is it a proverbial soapbox or is it a literal soapbox? Yeah, it's literal. Anyhow, then I welcome in a guest who will help me identify ways to use technology to answer two questions that a teacher might have. And that guest for today is the wonderful Marcia Kish. Marcia is awesome, and I think that you're going to love what she shares today. Anyhow, after that guest portion, we then move on to hearing from the duct tapers. That's the part where I share an Apple Podcast review, a few #EDU duct tape tweets, and a response from the Educational Duct Tape Flipgrid. And then my new favorite part of the show happens a week later when we have the #EDU Duct Tape Twitter chat. So as I said, episodes come out every other Wednesday morning. Well, on the other Wednesdays, we have the #EDU Duct Tape Twitter chat. And by the way, that's #EDU Duct, D-U-C-T, Duct Tape Twitter chat. So hashtag not EDU Duck, quack, quack, #EDU Duct with a T, tape, Twitter chat. Anyhow, last week we had our second chat and it was great. So much fun. It was super cool to have that many people join in for a chat based on my podcast. It just feels so good. But they shared so much awesomeness too. So in the show notes, you'll find a link to some of my favorite tweets from the chat. If you missed the chat, please check it out. If you were part of the chat, check it out to see what tweets of yours are in there. Looking at that post is also a perfect way to get the feel for how a Twitter chat works if you happen to be a first timer. So if you've never done it, go check out that list and you'll get the feel for how it happens, the flow of what a Twitter chat works like and the formatting of how everything is done and the fun that you're missing out on if you've never done it before. That way you can get ready for our next chat, which will be Wednesday, September 25th, 1 week from the day this releases at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll chat about 5 questions from today's episode. The first will be from the game that I play with Marcia today. The second will be from the soapbox moment today. And the third and fourth questions will be the 2 questions that Marcia and I discuss in this very episode. And the 5th question is a bonus question. It's your chance to share something, a reaction, a comment, a thought, an extension from the episode that you didn't get to share during the rest of the chat. Anyhow, I hope that you'll all join us. I've also linked in the show notes a Google Calendar that'll show you all of the upcoming chat dates and episode release dates. You can click on it and add the whole calendar to your Google Calendar or just copy over certain events like the Twitter chats to your own calendar so that you can get reminders and know when they're happening. And remember, you can listen without chatting and you could chat without listening. There are no requirements here. I know that you're busy and I know you live in different time zones and I know some of you have kids and I know some of you go to sleep after Jeopardy. If you can't chat, it's okay. Or if you respond to the chat questions the next day, that's okay too. We accept whatever level of involvement you want to take in this duct taper community. We would love to have you for the chat, but it's not a requirement. Anyhow, I skipped over an important note there. Speaking about levels of involvement in the duct taper community, I mentioned that post that was curated of the favorite tweets from last week's Twitter chat. Well, I didn't actually curate all of those tweets myself. In the last episode, I put out a request for anyone willing to help me with some of the tasks involved with the show, and a group of awesome educators stepped up and have become the Mighty Ducts. Get it? Ducts? Like ducks with a T, but like Mighty Ducks, like the movie, quack, quack. Mighty Ducks. Anyhow, big thanks to the Mighty Ducts for helping out with curating those tweets and supporting the show in a variety of ways. There's really so many things that are part of this mission and vision of educational duct tape that I'm trying to make happen to assist educators across the country and across the world. And I needed some support. So thank you to this newly formed team, which includes Alex Orris, Angela Green, Benjamin Voss, Brandy New, Dan Stitzel, Jennifer Conti, Joshua Huff, Lisa Marie Bennett, Matt Meyer, Melissa Van Heck, Molly Clodor, Nancy Green, Pan Inabinet, which is my favorite last name ever, by the way, Pam Inabinet. I hope I'm pronouncing it right because I love it. It's fun. And finally, Sarah Kiefer. Thank you so much to you, 13 wonderful people. I'm just honored that you're giving up any amount of time to support me and help me out. I really, 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 really appreciate it. Before I step up on the soapbox, let's check in on my calendar. In October, I'll be at Tecumseh Local Schools and Twinsburg Schools here in Ohio, the Quincy Conference in Illinois, and at TCCA in Texas. In November, I'll be keynoting the My Google Conference in Michigan, doing a mini keynote at the WVIZ IdeaStream Technology and Learning Conference in Cleveland, and speaking at the Teach Better Conference right down the street in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. That's actually all for 2019, so if you need a speaker, trainer, presenter, or consultant, hit me up at JakeMillerTech at gmail.com. There are a few things that are in the works for 2020, but we'll save all of that for now. So that's where you could see and hear me in person, but what about over the internet? A few weeks ago, I was honored to be a guest on the GEG Ohio monthly member meeting. That's a lot of M's there. And you can watch it on YouTube or listen to it on your podcatcher. So a little background there. GEG Ohio is the Google Educators Group for the state of Ohio. Eric Kurtz, who's a rock star. If you don't follow Eric, please go out and do that. Eric Kurtz has been holding online monthly meetings for this group for years, where he updates viewers and listeners on what's new in Google, as well as what Google educators have been sharing online. It's not really Ohio-focused, except for the part about upcoming conferences. And so they welcome anyone in because the majority of the show is applicable to everyone. Now, nowadays, Stephanie Howell has stepped up to help Eric with GEG Ohio, and the meetings are also available as podcasts now, thanks to Stephanie for making that addition to the programming. So I got to be on the August 29th episode, and you should check it out. I put information, links to both the YouTube video and the podcast episode itself into the show notes so you could access them and check them out. One last note before stepping up on the soapbox, I'm going to stick in the show notes a link to the Educational Podcasters database where you could see a directory of a whole bunch of educational podcasts. If you notice one that's missing, there's even a spot to suggest additions. So I'll put the link in the show notes so you can check it out. It's a great way to find other podcasts out there. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me just grab my soapbox from over here. Yeah. There we go. That's perfect. Climb up on there. Back in season 1 of the podcast, I talked on a few different episodes about the adjacent possible theory. This is the theory that, in a simplified form, what's possible for us expands by what's adjacent to us. Meaning, the more you expose yourself to, the more possibilities you open up for yourself. So in one specific example, I started working with a tech leadership team in my old district about a decade ago. One of the other people in that group pushed me to join Twitter. Twitter opened up a whole array of new possibilities for me and took me on a huge number of journeys. One instance was following Kim Polishuk and Jen Giffen, which then exposed me to their podcast, Shooks and Giff, the podcast, which I love, by the way, and then allowed me to connect with the two of them and have them on my podcast. Well, last season, when Jen was on Educational Duct Tape, she shared a piece of knowledge about how to look at educational technology. The way she said it was, there are many ways to achieve the verb that don't depend on the noun. Well, this piece of knowledge was another adjacent possible. Jen heard it through speaker and educator Chris Betcher, who directed credit back to Marc Prensky, the originator of this verbs and nouns perspective of educational technology. Now, I had not heard of Marc Prensky or his work, so I did some researching, and I found that in a number of blog posts and videos, as well as his book, Teaching Digital Natives, Partnering for Real Learning, Marc Prensky makes a distinction between verbs and nouns. I'm not sure that he's actually saying we need more verbs and less nouns, which is how I hear it said in some locations, but rather that we need to focus on the verbs. He says, verbs are the unchanging things we always want all students to do. For example, communicate, analyze, present, understand, create. He lists more verbs or skills in other locations, such as his book, but I like this list that he used in another post where he listed to collaborate, to solve problems, to think critically, to be more creative, to persuade, to present logically, and we could certainly list more. So those things are the verbs, and they're the things that we really care about for our students. But I agree with Prensky when he argues that we spend more time focusing on the nouns, which are, as he says, the rapidly changing tools for doing these things. And I sound like a total hypocrite here, I know, because I host a podcast about educational technology where we talk about different technology tools. But you'll notice a key difference in the perspective that I'm always taking. My guests and I always focus on the problem, goal, learning standard, or need first. In the nearly 10 months since I launched this podcast, I've asked more than 50 questions, some of them from me, some from the audience, and others suggested by the actual guests. And they all focus on verbs, not nouns. The nouns, of course, are often the answer: Adobe Spark, Flipgrid, Pear Deck, Nearpod, Google Slides, nouns. And that's fine, but the message here is that we need to be open to the nouns changing. And that's okay, because our focus is not on the noun, it's on the verb. Now, this makes it difficult for us educators because it requires integrating a new noun this year and being open to changing it a year or two down the road. But as we heard from Tony Jackson last week, being the change takes practice. Not the kind that you do until it's perfect, the kind that you do because it's worth it. So we need to be open to those nouns changing while we focus on the verbs because it's worth it. And actually, sometimes the nouns don't change. You see, sometimes you don't have to adopt a new noun or edtech tool because the old noun or edtech tool is achieving the verb just as well as the new noun or edtech tool would. And that's important to keep in mind. We have to be open to change, but we have to think critically about when to change and why to change. In my searching for details about the nouns and verbs idea, I came across a post from education consultant Mike Muir, whose site is actually titled More Verbs, Fewer Nouns. I'm not sold on the we need more verbs and fewer nouns stance. I think it should be more focus on verbs, less focus on nouns. Anyhow, in this post, Muir talks about that notion from Prensky that became the title of his site. But Muir shares another quote, which he credits to Ralph Granger, and it goes, "When you go to the hardware store to buy a new drill bit, you don't really want a drill bit. You want a hole." So when we go to an EdTech conference or hop onto our EDU Twitter account or tune into an educational technology podcast like this one, we're not there to buy drill bits. We're there for the verb. We're there to help students create, to help students collaborate, to help students own their learning, to help students think critically, to help students share their voice or perspective, to help students remember, to apply, to comprehend, to learn, to grow, to collaborate, to create, to own, to think, to share. And technology presents a tremendous set of tools for that. An array of tools, just like duct tape. But just remember, it's just a set of tools. They're not the goal. The verb is the goal. Identify your verb and you know your why. Then select your noun. Identify your noun and you know your how and your what. But when we identify the tech tool that we will use or our students will use, we start with the why. We start with the verbs. It doesn't mean don't pay attention to the sources that tell us about the new nouns or edtech tools. It means do so with the verb-focused lens. Speaking of verbs, let's talk, chat, collaborate, discuss, laugh, share, and connect with today's guest.
Today's guest.
Today's guest is Marcia Kish. Marcia is a blending learning specialist and coach for DSD professional development. With over 10 years of experience as a blended learning coach, she has developed a 3-phase implementation guide on how a classroom can move towards allowing student voice, choice, and ownership to personalize their learning. You can contact Marcia at blendedlearningpd.com or on Twitter at DSDPD or visit their website at blendedlearningpd.com. Welcome in, Marcia.
Hey, thanks, Jake, for having me.
Yeah, so Marcia and I got to meet this past summer. We had to travel all the way to Texas to meet, even though we're both Ohioans.
OH.
I-O, right? We should really, instead of traveling down to Houston in the summer, though, when it's like a pleasant 85 here and a torturous 102 there, we should probably be meeting in Texas in December, don't you think?
Oh my gosh, for sure. Did you even notice that the birds would hide underneath the cars because it's so hot out? They wouldn't even be in the trees. They're hiding under the shade of the cars.
Some of them were napping. I saw a bird underneath my car, and he was in a like a beach recliner, sipping a little drink with an umbrella sticking out of it.
Yes, because that's the only place that's cool. I mean,
we're hydrating.
It's hot.
Up here, we're like, it hits 88, and we're like, make sure your air conditioning is going to be working today.
I know. And they're like, 88 is air conditioned.
Right. That's what they set their air conditioning to.
So true.
We're going to set it to a cool 88. And we're like, holy heck, it's 88 up here.
That's funny.
Yep. I loved it down there. That was my first time in Texas, though. So I know, so I was at the Sci-Fair Digital Learning Conference, and I know you've worked with Sci-Fair, and I'm kind of jealous of what you're doing down there with them, because it's not just like a one-off show up and present and then never know if the stuff you present about gets used or not. Tell us about what you're actually doing with Sci-Fair and other schools that, work with you through DSD.
Well, they say everything is bigger in Texas. Well, that is true. It is 100% a fact that this Texas school, Sci-Fair ISD, has 91 buildings, and they are really committed to changing the way teachers are teaching. They really just want best practices in place. And so they've hired me out for this will be my second full year working with them. And what I do is I do these kickoff workshops, and we call it blended learning. And we go in and we work with the teachers on how to redesign their lesson so they're meeting the needs of the individual students. So we do these workshops with the teachers, and they have this whole entire week professional development in August before they start back to school. So I meet with groups of teachers every single day to help them to create their craft, to make sure that they're using their scope and sequence, to really help infuse this blended learning process into their classroom. Then, as a year goes through, every month I will go back and visit those teachers that I worked with over the summer. So once a month, I'm in their building, seeing how they're doing, working with them, giving them level up strategies, because we've developed this like online software platform that can actually help coach the teachers through the process. So when I'm there, I'm giving them those in-time instructional needed ideas. But the best part about my job is that since I get to work with them throughout the whole year, I get to see my little idea like, hey, try this with your students. And then when they go back, they blow it up into something bigger and better. And it's truly one of those most empowering moments is when I get to be in that classroom.
I would be geeking out if I got to do that, like to come back and see what you taught them get used and get kind of kicked up a notch from the teacher's perspective.
100%. It is like one of my ultimate favorite parts is being there right beside the teachers and the students. Like I actually get to watch the students go through some of those ideas I talked about. And I'm like, they're using their checklist folder and it works.
Awesome.
I get really excited. But it's not just Sci-Fair that we work with. We have schools like all over the country. In fact, we have schools in Canada and South America, as well as in California, Ohio, New Jersey, South Carolina, Florida, you name it. We're all over.
Oh, that's fun, getting to travel and see the stuff get implemented in the classroom. So I know on your website, there's your deployment plan. Is that kind of what you're doing with those schools?
Yeah, so we have this deployment plan that we put together, and it's for schools that don't necessarily always get to have me come out on site. I'm like, what if I had this process in place? What would Marcia Kish do moments? So each month I list out, here are 5 things to work on. We have embedded videos, we have embedded resources, we have like printables that you can use that go along with this deployment plan on that website. And it just becomes your own personal coach. So those schools that I'm working with, they get it all the time. Every month I'm in there. But for those schools that don't, or if a teacher just wants to really try to implement blended learning on their own or good practices, then they can just go in and have this like little mini deployment plan.
Oh, that's cool. The reason I really like this is because we have the situation in a lot of schools now where people are starting to become tech coaches, which is wonderful and it's amazing. But typically they're just educators who in their classroom use a lot of technology, and they've been recognized by their school district as being really good at that. And so they've been given this opportunity to coach their peer teachers. But when they went to college, they were learning how to be classroom teachers, right? There's no training out there, at least not that I'm aware of how to become an instructional coach or how to become a tech coach. And so what you kind of created here is like a model for how they could do that, right?
Absolutely. And it's really good for the coaches too, because it's like, hey, I got this person who's going to help give me videos and resources, and I can go in then and try it out with my teachers. 100%. There are a couple people that do have instructional coaching out there. Like Jim Knight has an instructional coaching application and website that talks about instructional coaching. But more and more universities are actually coming to me to be like, hey, how do we deploy this coaching model into it? So it's not a thing yet, but it's becoming one. I hope so.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. It's cool. You're kind of on the forefront of that, and you're using the actual experiences that you're having out there with the schools to craft it and to really see what's working. Like you're not just, at your computer typing this stuff up. You're out there hitting the pavement and actually trying it out in the classroom.
Yes, that's my favorite part about my whole job is being side by side with the teacher and the students. Yeah,
I believe it. And seeing the smiles, seeing the teachers when they accomplish something they didn't think they could do, and seeing the students when they're enjoying the classes like that and learning new things. How cool. I'm when I grow up, I want to be Marcia Kish. Is that okay?
Oh, thanks, Jake. I think you already are. I think you're way more cooler than me. I mean, come on, look at this podcast and how many people you have following you. I mean, like
we're having fun. Me and the Duct Tapers, we're having a good time. That's them. Okay, so speaking of having fun, let's play a little game. You ready for a game?
I love games. Let's do it.
Which of these things do you consider to be less torturous?
So we're going to play a game of which of the following is less torturous, which actually typically goes by a better known name, but it's copyright infringement for me to name it. So I can't actually say it. So my first which of the following is less torturous question actually came from my daughter got a would you rather book that I've been stealing. Oh, I said the name.
Okay.
That I've been stealing the questions from. And this one actually made me laugh out loud when I read it because it's just so silly. So I'm going with it. Which of the following would be less torturous? Having edible noodle hair that regrows every night. So you've got noodles growing out of your head that you can eat, or sweating sugar syrup, like I guess it's maple syrup, maybe. Which of the following would be less torturous? Sweating sugar syrup or having edible noodle hair?
Oh my God. Both are disgusting, and I don't know which one I'd prefer, but
I guess you don't have to eat either of them. You just have it, right?
I guess, like if you're going to sweat, why not sweat sugar? I mean, that way people, if you're like stuck in an island, you can at least have something edible to eat. Like, I think I would go with the sugar versus than the edible noodle hair, because I just don't know how I would style that.
Right, it'd be hard to style. I assume a ponytail.
What do you do?
I'm now picturing you like a cat, like sitting around licking your paws.
Yum.
You're right. You're grooming yourself to get to taste some of the sweaty sugar. This is gross. Way to go, Jake. You've created the grossest podcast episode yet. I'm 26 episodes in, 27 episodes in, and now I've made my grossest one. Here it is.
I might know. Well, which one would you pick? Would you want noodle hair or sweating sugar syrup?
I want noodle hair. I want the carbs to be able to have energy. Like if I'm feeling a little tired, I'll just take a little nibble.
Oh my God. You never know.
I'm wondering if I'd have a noodle beard too.
Well, is a noodle cooked noodle hair, or is it like just like noodles that are stiff, like like not cooked noodles?
We get the pick. I'm going to pick for mine to be cooked.
Okay, go with the cooked ones.
I can just eat it. I guess if it's not cooked, you have to like cut it off and then boil it.
Oh my God.
I guess. Or not. I guess there's an option of not doing that. You can just not do either.
Right. You could just eat it raw. Oh, man.
Yeah, raw noodles.
That's really funny. That little book sounds really good. I'm going to have to buy that for my nieces and nephews.
It's called Which of the Following is Less Torturous? Volume 1. Not really. Okay, my next question. This one's a little bit more ed tech and a little less about eating your hair.
Okay.
Which of the following would be less torturous? Doing all of your communication, I mean all of your communication with everyone via Snapchat, or having to do all of your communication, I mean all of it, no more emails or text messages, in person?
Oh gosh, this one is really, okay. I wish it said Instagram versus Snapchat. Then it would be hands down. I would do all my communications through Instagram. Snapchat, I'm just not a big fan of all the time, but
That's the worst.
I would definitely not do it in person.
You're picking Snapchat?
I'm picking Snapchat because of the fact that I think it's harder nowadays to communicate with people because we're so used to communicating through devices. Like having a phone call or being able to actually, well, you said in person, like actually having to go there. Like I'd have to go to Texas every time I wanted to talk to somebody. That would just not be good. So just because of the miles in between. So I think it would definitely have to be a Snapchat communication.
Okay.
What about you?
You guys heard it here. Hit Marcia up on Snapchat.
Yeah.
She uses the best filters.
I'm a snapper.
I guess I hate Snapchat, but I guess I'm going with you. I'd rather have digital communication than all in person. So I'll use Snapchat.
You would use Snapchat too. Yeah.
It confuses the heck out of me though.
I'm not a big snapper. I love Instagram. I love Twitter. I love posting through all other social medias through Wakelet, but something about Snapchat, I just don't understand. Why would I want to post something and then it be gone? Like, how can I not go back and look at it later? I don't know.
You know what the problem is?
What?
We're old.
John.
Like if we weren't old, we would be like, Snapchat's awesome. Why don't you understand?
You're right. We are old.
We are.
Right. With old comes wisdom.
Right. And no understanding that Snapchat's the worst. Okay. Let's get to some real educational technology. So for any new listeners we might have here with us today, we're going to do the whole educational duct tape thing. And what educational duct tape is my goofy metaphor, as if you can't tell that I'm goofy already, my goofy metaphor that educational technology is at its best when it's a tool being used to solve a problem or address a learning standard or meet a goal that we might have in the classroom, not when it's the focus. We're not focusing on using the technology. We're focusing on doing what we know is best for our students or for our classrooms and using technology as a tool, just like how we use duct tape as a tool. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, so our first question is actually audience submitted question. So this came from Monica Howa Johnson. Monica, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But she asked, how can we help students foster a sense of ownership in their new classroom? So how can we help students foster a sense of ownership in their new classroom? So this is a back to school focused question since we're in September, but I guess it doesn't even have to be a new classroom. How can we just help them foster that sense of ownership?
This is a big question I get a lot because we want the kids to take ownership of their learning. We want it to become personalized. And how we do it has to be strategic. We can't just throw things at them. I don't know about you, Jake, but I mean, you just think about it. If I said, okay, take ownership of your learning, how do you know what to start or where to start? Right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I actually did a Fred Talk at this. A Fred Talk is from the Ohio EdTech conference in February. We do this. And it's a Fred Talk is just like quick facts about education. And I picked this topic because I really think it's one that holds dear and true to my heart. So when I spoke about it, I had 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes to give a speech. And the blog post you can find on that website that we posted earlier or in the notes. And it talks more about like how we develop student ownership. And there's this process that we go through. So if you don't mind, Jake, I'd like to talk about that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And I've seen the talk. It's wonderful. I'm going to link it in the show notes, but expound upon it here, and then I'll put the link in there as well.
I love it. So what I kind of came up with as student ownership is that there's got to be 3 key things that we have to really focus in on. 1, relationships. The other one is a roller coaster because I love roller coasters. And the last one is being able to release the students into it. And so like if we really stop and think about it, so I call it the 3 R's of student ownership. The first one is building relationships. We need to build those academic relationships with the students, and doing whole group instruction is not always a good way to build that because there's 24 or sometimes some of my schools have 38 kids in the classroom. And if you give just whole group instruction, you don't get to build that relationship with them. So what I like to talk to my teachers about when I'm working with them at workshops or when I'm coaching beside them is talking about how to design and develop that relationship aspect. One of the easiest way is to stop doing whole group all the time and move into what I call mini lessons or small group instruction. And when I pull students back into that small group instruction, I can quickly see if they have a question. I can be able to answer it. I'm looking at 5 kids versus a room full of 30 kids. And just by building that relationship where I'm teaching them in that small group, I then get their trust and they're going to be wanting to do more with me. Because it's not just always about teaching. Sometimes I'll ask the students, well, tell me about your new puppy. Hey, how's your new sister? Hey, I heard your dad was traveling to Texas. How are you doing today? Those little small little things, get those kids to buy into who you are and they work harder for you. So my number one thing with student ownership is you got to start with building that relationship with the students. You can't just say, okay, take control of your learning. You got to start small and then you build it up. And as the year goes on and you have those little conversations and you're teaching them in that small group environment, then it really fosters what we want to happen is students taking over. So then we go into like the roller coaster effect. Okay, now this is kind of interesting. And if you go to that website, it talks more about what the roller coaster is, but it's truly like standing at the bottom of a roller coaster, looking up going, oh my gosh, this ownership thing I can't do this. It's scary. I'm afraid. And what happens is when the kids take off and they start to take over their ownership, at first they're in shock. Like they'll go like, my teacher's just going to let me do what I want? Are you crazy? And kids will go home and they'll tell their parents, my teacher's not teaching me anymore. But in reality, the teacher's teaching more. So there's a shock phase of just letting them go. But remember, this is gradual. I just don't go and release the students into the student ownership. It's a process that we put into place. And that process is what we developed with those 3 phases of blended learning, where you actually transition from whole group into this process. But when we start to give the students a checklist, they go through a shock phase. And then they get into denial, like, okay, she's just not teaching me anymore. There's no way I could do this. I can't work it. So that's going up the hill, the roller coaster. And then when they're at the top of the roller coaster hill and looking down and think of that Millennium Force with that 90-degree, well, it's not 90-degree, but that big, huge drop, that first hill, right? But when they get to the top of the hill, they finally let go, and we call that surrender. Like we actually surrender, like going, okay, I can do this. I make students build confidence. Every checklist that they get complete, everything that they're working through, and they finally build that up. They build the confidence of taking ownership, and then they feel that success.
Yeah.
And it all depends on the student. We can't just expect every student to go through this roller coaster ride, like jump on and go right away. We had to look at each individual student to figure out, like, how do we allow them to take ownership through this whole process? Some grab hold of the ownership and they go really fast, where others, maybe it's just organizational skills. They just can't keep themselves organized. Maybe they have time management issues. So each student takes on this little journey of this roller coaster of the ownership in a different way. So we just have to be cognitive about what's happening and making sure that those students are getting their needs met, because everybody is different.
I love that. I love the way you're focusing on them understanding that there are the ups and downs. There are the times that the students are going to push back. There are the times where it's going to not go so well, but it's part of the path.
We almost had a mutiny in Twinsburg.
Yeah.
One of the teachers I was working with and coaching, and she is a phenomenal teacher. She actually pulled me aside. She was a gifted teacher. She's like, Marcia, I had parents calling me about the students taking their ownership, and they think that I'm not teaching anymore. So I sat down and coached the coach, and I said, she was a teacher. Now she's a coach at Twinsburg. When we sat down and talked to the teacher about, like, okay, so you need to have these conversations with the students. You can't just let it keep fostering, creating this illusion of what's happening. You need to sit down and talk to them. So she spent one whole day going through the process and laying out, saying, you guys, in 45 minutes, if I teach a whole group, then you're only really getting 10 minutes with me because we're waiting for this person to catch up. We're waiting for this person to turn to this page. So she had this discussion with them. And she's like, you get more work done and you learn more when you take ownership through your checklist, because while I'm teaching somebody, you're pulled to the side and you're able to go through and work on your own. So it's just one of those things that we just had to have those conversations to help the students. Yeah,
when Stacey Roshan was on the show a couple weeks back, she said something that she's big on a flipped classroom, which is not exactly precisely what you're talking about, but the same kinds of ideas. And she felt that when she first started doing it years before. And so she says now at the beginning of the year, she shares a video with the students and with the parents about this is why I'm doing this. So having them understand that why, like you're saying, that teacher went and said, listen, guys, this is the logic behind what I'm doing here. And it's showing the kids, like, number one, I care about you. Number two, I'm trying to do my best for you. And number three, there's a safety net in place. Like, I'm making sure this works for you, you know?
Yep. I agree. Like, you had to have right up front. In fact, Twinsburg, for their parent night, they had a video of me explaining what is the 3 phases of blended learning to the parents so that they would have an understanding. And it was myself walking through like, hey, this is what's going to happen throughout this year. But they had to have an understanding, and you have to be able to customize it. Just because you give a checklist to every student saying, here's what you need to do, some kids might need to learn how to prioritize. Right. And sitting down with those kids during your mini lesson, going through saying, okay, well, how much of your checklist do you have done? Okay, these are your priorities. This is what you need to focus in reality, Jake, you know what it's building? It's building successful career options for these students. It's teaching them how to actually be ready for career college citizenship is really what this is all developing.
Right. Yeah. I've heard people kind of, there's the kind of famous thing out there about how education was designed to prepare factory workers. And I've heard people debunk that theory, but in general, we know that the way we tend to do things in classrooms traditionally isn't the way that people are going to work out there in the job force. And so we need to do things in our classrooms that prepare the students for working in a 21st century workforce. And that's kind of what you're saying you're doing here, right? You're putting them in charge of it, just like we're often in charge of our own work.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I got this from Huntington Banks. My husband was a IT computer programmer for Huntington Banks, and they use this program called Agile work environment. And everything that I kind of built upon for like the deployment plan for like this whole blended learning process came from watching him work in this environment where he had to do daily stand-ups, where he had to get up in front of the group and say, this is where I'm working on, this is where my roadblocks are, this is what I'm going to be doing next. And they had a time frame to get their stuff done. So when we're actually creating these checklists and setting this up for the student ownership, we are kind of mimicking the computer programming world called Agile.
Yeah.
Kind of fun.
Yeah, that's very cool. I like the way that you actually modeled something that's good for the kids for their work futures based off of something from the workplace. That's perfect.
I know. Yeah, imagine
cool.
that.
Yeah. So for those of you that are like, yes, we need to talk about this at our school, the Fred Talk of Marcia's is in the links here in the show notes. Go check it out. You can watch your video and see more about, the 3 R's and that roller coaster ride. Now, the way I answered the question, I looked at Monica's question a little bit differently. And I think that's okay because we're both going to, one of the 2 ways is what Monica's looking for. And what you shared was great. And I'm hoping what I shared won't be as great as yours. I'm sure of that, Marcia. but I'm hoping it's useful. So she was asking about a sense of ownership. Now, you came at that as how do we give students a sense of ownership in their learning, right? Which is good because that then gives them a sense of ownership of their classroom. Because if they're steering the learning, then that is their classroom, right? That's the place where they experience that learning. But I was more thinking of it as just the classroom. And what I started thinking about here in relation to this was how a lot of teachers nowadays, which I love, share about their class on, maybe it's on Facebook, maybe it's on Instagram, maybe it's on Class Dojo, but they use, or maybe it's on Remind, but they use some app or program or website to share with the parents and the guardians what's happening in the classroom, which parents and guardians love because then they have an understanding of it. And if they're doing a good job, then they could talk to the kids about what they're learning because they know what activities took place in school. But I think the one thing that we could do even better here is stop having the teacher be the one to share what's happening in the classroom and start having the kids be the ones sharing what's happening in the classroom.
You said you have a student who's in kindergarten, correct?
Yeah, kindergarten, third, and fourth grade are my kiddos. Yep.
Could you imagine getting a video of your child reading? Right. And at the end of it, it says, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Don't forget to subscribe."
Yeah. That's what he says at the end of videos anyhow.
Oh, that's right. No, right? That's what they always say. But we use Seesaw. Seesaw.me is one of those tools. And you're right. Why are we as a teacher's posting it, why aren't the kids?
Right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just thought about that.
No,
Go ahead.
that's perfect. And I love the idea of using Seesaw for that. So Seesaw is a tool that I'm actually trying to learn a little more about because most of my time in the classroom and in tech coaching roles has worked with middle schools. And I know that Seesaw is kind of pigeonholed as being an elementary program. And I know it's wonderful for the elementary, but can you kind of expand upon what it does? And is it true that it's really just for elementary?
I have so many schools that talk about that. And I have high school teachers who are like, oh, Seesaw. Seesaw's for elementary. I'm like, no, you guys, Seesaw is not just an elementary platform. It is actually a really good resource from K-12. In fact, I even use it in some of my professional development workshops.
Wow.
So some of the ways that we use it is just like when we're doing different activities and the kids are doing like fluency check at the younger grades, or at a high school example would be my art teacher at Minter High School. What she would do is she would actually have the students take every Wednesday, they would take a photo of their artwork and they would post it. So we created like this portfolio of their artwork in progress. She asked outside artists to come in and give like tidbits or like kind of like, hey, watch what you're shading here or look for this, just to kind of give them another perspective. And at the end of their artwork, when their artwork was hanging, that a teacher would go and have the kids create like a 1-second film of each one of their photos that they did. And they'd have a QR code at the bottom of it. So you could see the work from the very beginning to the final product. And it just became like this portfolio builder.
Yeah.
Currently City Schools is another example that is using it as a portfolio from K-8. It's going to be every year they upgraded and got the premium version. Every year they're going to be posting work in there so they can see the kids' growth over time. Like how do they read in kindergarten versus how are the fluency in 8th grade? So it just becomes a portfolio builder.
Yeah. So a lot of teachers think, like at least in the Google ecosystem, we think that Google Sites is the best way to go to for a digital portfolio. And Google Sites makes a wonderful digital portfolio, but the problem is you're using a website builder to make a digital portfolio. And you're talking about using a essentially digital portfolio tool to make digital portfolios. So it's a system that is built for doing this, right?
I love Google Sites, yes. And I would definitely recommend as high school, if you really want a portfolio, build a website because it could go with you. But this is easy for teachers. It's easy for students. It's easy for parents to come in and see exactly what the students are doing. So it's a no fear website builder that I would recommend. And they've made a lot of updates over the summer.
Yeah.
So it's really kid user friendly. Anybody can do it. Like even my low tech teachers can instantly put in Seesaw into their classroom. And
that can be kind of the nice thing of something that, even though it's being kind of incorrectly pigeonholed as an elementary tool, because it's elementary friendly, that also means it's tech novice friendly, right?
Correct.
That's nice. So I'm hoping people will go check it out because I've finally kind of, my ears have perked up and I go, I need to get with the games on Seesaw and learn more about it. So I hope that people are going to go check it out as well because it really does have a lot of potential.
Well, I am a Seesaw ambassador. So anytime you need to learn anything about Seesaw, you can come find me. I'll be more than willing to show you. Nice.
Okay. I'm going to jump on Route 77 South and you jump on 77 North.
Oh, and Mansfield.
We'll find like a cow pasture somewhere in central Ohio, and you can teach me all about it.
Show you how to use Seesaw.
Nice. Perfect. Another thing I was thinking about is the school that I work at, we had a Twitter account for the students, kind of. And what happened was I was doing the tweeting, but the students were writing the tweets. So they were submitting the tweets to me via Google Form. And then I was screening them and then tweeting them out. And so I had this Google form set up and I used data validation to make sure it had less than 280 letters and or characters in it. And then I would literally just copy it and paste it into a tweet and tweet it out to share about what's happening in the school.
So why were you the moderator? Why did you feel like you had to have that as part of it? Like you build in. Why did you decide to do that?
See, I don't think I actually needed to be a moderator. I don't think they needed the moderation. I think what we needed was just a framework to get the tweets out there. So I probably could have put a student in charge of that, but there needed to be some end person or small group of people that take it and take the last step of tweeting it. Like I can't just give them all the password and have them all tweeting. So I don't think that my moderation was required. The only beneficial thing that I was able to do was go like, yeah, this kid's not using this the way we expected it to be used. No, it wasn't bad. Like nobody ever submitted anything bad to be tweeted out. But there were things where I was kind of screening in and out the things we wanted to be sharing. But you're right. I didn't need to be that middleman. The kids could handle it on their own. And so that's kind of what I had in mind. Now, the reason we actually ditched that was because most of our parents don't look at Twitter, right?
It's crazy, right?
Yeah. And so we found that platform wasn't quite working. So we had to pivot and try to figure out what to do instead of it. But my real message is here. Why are we as the teachers sharing about what's happening in the classroom? Because that's this is my classroom mentality. I know why teachers are doing it, because they've got so much on their plate that it's another thing to manage, to have the kids sending it out there. But if you can get that responsible kid to kind of take charge on this, why not give them that ownership, right?
I love it. It makes them feel like they're part of a community.
Yeah, and take pride in it.
Yeah, and they want to come to school. So if we get them to school, that's all a success for everybody.
Yeah.
I think that's I like your twist on it. I think that's really good.
Thanks. Marcia thought I did a good job. You guys.
Oh, so exciting.
Okay, Marcia. So I think you've got a different question for us.
So here's my next question. Like, how do we find the balance between too much tech and student ownership?
Yeah. So I think the big thing here is that we need to be purposeful and think through why we're doing everything we're doing. And that could be hard because we're doing so many things and we're busy and, we don't have a lot of time to plan out those lessons in the classrooms and things like that. But we need to think, what am I trying to achieve here today? So what's my goal? And what's going to get me to the best result? And it's not always going to be technology, and it's not always going to be a lot of different technologies. But so the best thing we could do is think about what our goals are. And hopefully one of our goals is that student ownership piece. So if we're always thinking about it from that goal perspective, then we can make sure the tech is being used purposefully. And we'll notice some times where, there's no reason to use tech for this particular activity. Let's shut the screens and let's have the kids talking, or let's use paper and pencil, but actually being very purposeful about why we're using what we're using. And you said earlier, you talk about blended learning. And sometimes, especially on a podcast like this, we can almost forget about the blend, right? There's another part to the blend. The other part of the blend is the face-to-face and in-person kind of stuff. So we've got to think about why are we doing it and what's best to achieve those goals we have.
Yeah, I think it's completely, you're right on. Like, we had to find it. Like, why would I want them to be typing it or creating a poster online when I can just have them make a regular poster?
Right. Unless you have some reason for it, unless you're like, well, then I'm going to share it and the other kids are going to comment on it. You're like, okay, well, then it makes sense, right? But if that's not part of it, then why?
Yep. And I think there's a big balance. A lot of my school districts I work with have gone almost one-to-one. And that's a really great thing. But you know what I see when I go into the classrooms with those schools that are one-to-one is everybody's looking at a device, and including the teacher. And I'm like, I think there's a time and a place. I think that, if the kids are working on a device and they're doing a project, then the teacher has that opportunity to pull small groups back and being like, hey, let's talk about this skill. Let's talk about this. They can bring their laptops back and take notes if they need to. But I think there's got to be a balance. I actually like working with school districts that are not always one-to-one. It doesn't mean I won't work with one-to-one school districts. But I'm going back to Sci-Fair ISD in Texas. They are a 91 campus building, and they decided to go 7 devices per classroom. 7. And it actually makes the teacher think about, well, what is that tool that I really want those kids to be working on? Is it a data collecting tool where they're going to be relearning the concept through some digital content? Is it something where they're going to be creating like a Flipgrid or a Wii video? Like, what is it that I want those 7 devices to be used for? And I think it has made that school district become better thinking outside the box, because I only have 7 versus some people are like, well, we'll just all do a week video, or we'll just all do a Flipgrid. So the teacher has to be like, if I have 7 kids or 14, if they pair up working on this, what are the rest of the group going to be doing? And so I think it's always finding that balance. And believe it or not, there's a study going on at Ohio State University saying that, I know this because my aunt and uncle are optometrists, and they just told me these facts. That if we spend
hold on, Marcia. It's the Ohio State University.
I'm sorry. Oh, you're the Ohio State University. I know. I'm sorry. All those Buckeye fans out there, I apologize.
Right.
But they're doing.
Sorry.
It's funny. They're doing a study talking about how we are becoming nearsighted at an earlier age because of all the screens. And the biggest one is dry eye syndrome. So, finding the balance between getting on your computer and looking up is the biggest thing for me. And I'm really a big advocate about this is you don't need to be on a device all day, every day. We can close the lids. We can create a traditional poster. We can have just conversations without always having to post it. But again, just like you said, there's that, what is the purpose? If I want that poster to be shared and I want to be shared globally, well, then let's build an online poster. So it's just finding the balance, making sure it's purposeful.
Yeah. And we think about it, those of us out there that are parents, we do this with our kids all the time. My kids have a very limited amount of screen time. It's maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, depends on the day and whether it's a school day or a weekend or what it might be, or whether we're traveling or what it might be. But we're always thinking about when the kids want to know if they can get on the screen, I'm always thinking, what are they going to do on the screen? If they're just looking, I don't know, for entertainment, then maybe I say, let's read a book instead. Or maybe if they're just looking to play because they're bored, maybe I say, well, let's go outside and go on a walk. But maybe they're looking to create things. And I say, well, okay, well, maybe now we're going to use Scratch on the computer or something like that. Or my son likes to research statistics for basketball players and things like that. And I'm like, that's an appropriate use of the screen. So it's thinking about why are we doing it? Why are we using the screen in this situation? And you're right, because that school has less computers, it's forcing them, not that having less computers is necessarily better or worse, but it's forcing the teachers to think about what is my goal and why am I trying to use the technology and kind of get creative and think. I don't know, we know that putting ourselves into a box can kind of pique our creativity sometimes, even though we think it'd be the other way. But those teachers are kind of in that box and they're forced to think creatively about what they're doing and what their priorities are.
And they always look at it, whenever you don't have something, you think of it as the worst thing possible. So I actually have a presentation that goes through 7 devices and what that looks like. And I gave out 10 ways to use the devices, how you could get kids on. I mean, it is one of those, I should actually post it because it's actually useful for anybody who doesn't have a one-to-one. And it's not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. Either way works, but I seem to think that, like you said, you think outside the box. We put you in a box, and now you got to think outside of it. So,
right, yeah. Well, it's the same. Any question somebody asks in ed tech, if somebody asks me, should I use Pear Deck or should I use Nearpod or should I use Quizzes or should I use Kahoot? There's never a right answer, and the same thing goes with the number of devices in a classroom. It's about how are you going to use the thing that you're trying to use? What is your goal? What does your goal require? And thinking of the technology as a tool and being goal focused. How can the technology assist? It doesn't necessarily have to be one-to-one. It could be less one-to-one. It doesn't have to be Chromebooks. It could be Windows computers. It could be iPads. But being goal focused helps us find that balance, I think.
I couldn't have said it any better. Nice.
You probably could have a little bit better. I don't know.
That was pretty impressive. No, I love it. That's a really good thing. Just find the balance and know your why.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Marcia, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for asking. And I can't believe we had to go to Texas again to find and finally meet each other. I've known about you for a long time. I've been listening to the Educational Duct Tape for a long time. So it's exciting to be a part of it. And thank you for letting me share my information about student ownership.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have had you on. I hope everybody's going to go out and follow Marcia online. She is DSDPD on Twitter. You could also find more of her contact information and all of her resources and things like that at blendedlearningpd.com. Marcia, just wait for the bump. You're going to get probably 564 new Twitter followers thanks to this. Are you excited?
Oh my gosh, I'm all in. Let's do it.
Here they come. Everybody go follow Marcia. Thank you, Marcia, for being with us.
Thanks, Jake. Have a good one.
So much great knowledge coming from Marcia in this episode, in this interview. She is a rock star in blended learning. I hope you guys go follow her and check out those free resources on her site. It was an absolute pleasure having her on the show. Very excited about that. Now, it is time to hear from the duct tapers. So we got 3 different ways that you as a duct taper can be heard on the show. One is through the Educational Duct Tape Flipgrid, which has a couple different sections to it. You could find it at eduducttape.com and then click on the Flipgrid link or flipgrid.com/edu duct tape. The second way is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, which I just generally appreciate anyhow because it helps other educators find the show and spreads the message a little bit further and brings more duct tapers into our group here. So I do appreciate it, but it also gets you heard on the show. And the next one is tweets. There's too many tweets for me to share all of them, but I share my favorites and then I share the Twitter handles of the new duct tape tweeps of the week, or the 2 weeks, since it's 2 weeks between episodes. We're going to start off with one of our 2 Flipgrid submissions for the week. We've got 2 different ladies with the last name Howell. I assume they're not related, but first up, we're going to hear from Stephanie Howell. And before I get into it, somebody suggested last year, and I can't remember if it was Stephanie or if it was Emily Coldwell, I'm really not sure which it was, that we should have a section of the Flipgrid for duct tapers to share ed tech tools that you guys are shared about. And so here is Stephanie from actually last spring sharing a tool that she's excited about. Now, I'm going to try to share one of these each week, so feel free to go on there and share about ed tech tools, but you have to remember as a listener what we talked about back in the soapbox from this episode, which was we don't want to focus too much on the nouns, which is what these people are sharing about, and that's great. The hearing about the nouns and knowing about the nouns is important. We want to focus on the verbs. So as you listen to this great thing that Stephanie shares, as she shares a noun, think about if it matches any of the verbs in your classroom or your school or whatever your role is. So think about the verbs, the things that you're trying to achieve in your setting, and see if Stephanie hits on any of those verbs when she shares about this noun. Take it away, Stephanie.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Howe, and I am an instructional technology coordinator for Pickerington Local School District in Ohio. And I just listened to episode 13, and I just wanted to share that BrainPop also has some really cool other features that were not talked about on the podcast for episode 13, such as my students love to make a BrainPop movie. So it's called Make a Movie in BrainPop, and students actually get to be 10. There's also a place, it's called Make a Map, and students get to make concept maps. So they could make a compare and contrast, so using a Venn diagram. Students can make different connections to understand and help make their learning sticky. So again, check out those other features in BrainPop. Thank you so much, Jake, for your podcast. I enjoy listening every single week.
Okay, so that was some new learning for me. I was not aware of those 2 different tools in BrainPop. I knew there was a whole lot of options on that screen, a whole lot of things that I could potentially click on, but I wasn't aware of the Make a Movie and Make a Map or a concept map there. So those are really useful to know about. And so as I was saying, take those 2 nouns, the ability to make a movie on BrainPop and the ability to make a content map on BrainPop, and think about the things that you're trying to achieve with your students. Now, if the verb you're trying to achieve is make a content map or make a movie, then these are 2 different nouns, BrainPop, and both of them that you can kind of fill in there. So think about that from the lens of what you're trying to achieve for your classroom. Now, Stephanie, by the way, is a rock star educator and ed tech user. We mentioned her earlier in the show and her involvement with GEG Ohio. She's also a Google innovator. Recently, I believe, just this last spring, maybe, Stephanie? I'm not sure. It was 2019, I know. But anyhow, she is a rock star, and you should follow her. She is at Mrs. Howell 24, HOWELL 24. Now, before we get to our other Flipgrid submission, let's go to the Apple Podcast reviews. I'm going to share 2 for the week. First up, we've got Alan Owens, ALENOANS 717. It says, I so enjoy listening to this podcast. Jake is entertaining and also provides so many great educational technology ideas. I always walk away from this podcast with a giggle and a new idea to put to use in my classroom right away. Keep it up. Next up, we've got a review, and thank you for that one, by the way, Alan Owens, whoever you are. Next up, we've got Amanda Soup Tidwell, which is a really cool name, Amanda Soup Tidwell. I'm not sure if that's a hyphenated name, maybe Soup Tidwell, or who knows? Okay, I'm being weird here. And Amanda says, Jake seems very down to earth and is easy to listen to. Podcasts are full of great new tools and applications. Thanks for giving me new ideas and tools I can explore and use in my classroom. Thank you to both of you for those wonderful reviews. I really do appreciate it. As I said, it feels good for me to get that feedback and to hear that, what I'm sharing is having a positive effect on somebody. But it also helps other educators out there find the podcast. And when they read those reviews and hear these different things, it makes them feel comfortable to say, like, hey, I want to listen to that. So hopefully those reviews help bring in more duct tapers and positively impact more students. So I do really appreciate those reviews. Next up, before we get to those #EDU duct tape tweets for this episode, one more Flipgrid post today comes from the second Howell of the week, Jennifer Howell. Take it away, Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer here from Georgia, first-year principal. Love this podcast. Love how explicit you are and how you take those of us who are kind of new through the process and like your humor too. Anyway, just have enjoyed it. And yeah, it's the crack of dawn here and it's dark. But gotta get to work. Thanks.
I love the end of Jennifer's video there. You have to watch it because it is pitch black in the video. She's sitting in her car. It looks like it's maybe like 2 a.m. or something. But just like she said, got to get to work. It's the educator life, right? You got to get there before the kids get there. And sometimes that leaves you there bright and early, especially as an administrator, as a principal like she is. So glad to have you on board, Jennifer. That's cool having administrators listening too. As we talked about at the beginning of the show, we're hoping to get as many different kinds of educators into the community as we can so we get all those perspectives reflected in here. So Jennifer, thank you for leaving that Flipgrid response and for being a part of the Duct Taper community. The rest of you, visit that Flipgrid and share so you can get your voice on the show as well. And now on to our favorite hashtag EDU Duct Tape tweets of the week. The first requirement for getting your tweet read here is spelling duct right. It's D-U-C-T because Duck with a K is a brand of duct tape, but it's not the kind of duct tape. Duct tape itself is D-U-C-T tape. So 2 T's in there. Duct tape. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is having a fun tweet. It's got to be something that either made me laugh or made me smile or something like that was enjoyable. So those are the requirements. Pretty easy requirements to meet, I believe. So we got 5 to share today. First up comes from local Ohio friend of mine, Mike Abrams, at AbramsTank95, who said, while listening to at JakeMillerTech's latest hashtag EDU duct tape episode, I was reminded of the original Steve on hashtag Blues Clues, having a full conversation with Blue. I believe a write-in campaign for best supporting character in a podcast is overdue for Jake's soapbox. The banter was, and then he gives me three fire emojis. Thank you for that, Mike. As you see, not only did it make me laugh when I first saw it, it made me laugh now rereading it. So I appreciate that. And he also included a fun Blues Clues gif of Steve doing the handy dandy hands, whatever he called those kind of like jazz hands that he did. Thanks for that, Mike. And Soapbox agrees, by the way. He thinks, though, he maybe is not best supporting character, maybe he's best lead character, and I'm the supporting character. I'm not sure. We've, as you can tell, we've got some, some work to do between the two of us, and we're going to start going to counseling together. Next up, at Mr. Wetzel _EdTech said, just called out my 10-year-old for acting annoyed because she actually likes the hashtag EDU Duct Tape podcast while in the car. She said that I may have just figured her out. Her claim is that the theme song is like Lego movie songs, annoying yet very catchy. I will take that. I told him in response that I think that phrase actually sums up me. That's me in a nutshell right there. Annoying yet very catchy. I love hearing about kids liking listening to this show. My kids actually enjoy hearing it every now and then. And they're like, Dad, are you talking about the duct tape again? Yeah, guys, talking about the duct tape again. Next, our friend Lisa Marie at Blue Square X said, now I have to go out and buy a Cricut. It's all your fault. At Tony Vincent. You and at JakeMillerTech are going to have to answer to my husband when the credit card bill comes in. Hashtag EDU duct tape. And I agree. I think a lot of us felt like we needed a Cricut after that episode. Lisa Marie, I think what you got to do is then go on to Etsy and start selling some of your creations there to offset the cost. That'll be your little side hustle there. Next, our friend at Virtual GIF, a guest from back in season 1, I think episodes 10 and 11. I'm not sure if that's correct. I'm not looking at the list right now. Said balloons full of frogs does sound terrifying. At JakeMillerTech and at Tony Vincent. Hashtag catching up on podcasts. Hashtag EDU duct tape. And she included a funny GIF of a woman panicking and blowing air in and out of a paper bag. Reminded me of the Sheldon GIF. But yeah, Jen, I knew that would scare you as Tony and I talked about his fear of frogs and your fear of balloons full of frogs. Yeah, it sounds silly to me, but I'm sure it's terrifying for you. And finally, at Mr. B Tech Teacher, this one this one made me proud and touched my heart and also made me laugh. Next up on the Mount Rushmore of must follows of Twitter is at JakeMillerTech, king of hashtag EDU GIF and hashtag EDU duct tape host. This guy celebrates other teachers' accomplishments in the classroom like no one else. Sign up for his newsletter. You'll be glad you did. So thank you for this. Charles, you're right. One of my favorite things about what I'm doing in education right now is sharing and celebrating the successes of other educators and spreading word of all these great things to other educators in our community. And it's exciting. But my favorite part of Charles's tweet is actually what he was sharing. And it was a picture of Mount Rushmore with my face added in place of George Washington's. To the general observer, I think that the reaction is that, wow, Charles is really good at using Photoshop or whatever tool he used to do that. But to me, To me, the reaction was, oh my gosh, well, that's me. Kind of freaked me out a little bit there, Charles. It was very good and funny and a little bit scary for me. So that's what I would look like with a white wig and a gray stone face, I guess. You'll have to look at the link to that tweet in the show notes to check it out. I always do whatever tweets I share. I include the link so that you guys can go to them and respond to them or share them or anything like that if you would like to. Next up, and finally, our new #EDU duct tape tweeps of the week. If I missed any of you, I apologize. Just tweet again, and I'll catch you next week, maybe. At Beth_Heller, at EdTech Etham, I think. There's a capital C, Cheatham? EdTech. I think it's supposed to be EdTech and Cheatham, and the CH is shared. At Effectual EDU, at Efren R. Efren, by the way, has really taken to stop motion slides and has made some really cool things for his science classroom. You should check him out on Twitter and see those things. At KRobTech, at Lisa Marie Tech, who we shared earlier on our old Twitter handle of at Blue Square X. I think this is her new handle here. At Mr. B Tech Teacher, who we just shared. At Mrs_San Roman. At Mrs. Beck in Fourth. At Mrs. Van Heck ITIS. At Mr. Teachwell, at Ms. Loftons_class, at NB Green, at Ryan Chorus, at SW_D Thomas, at S. Wenberg Science, at Thompson Class, and our guest from last week at Tony Vincent. And that does it for episode 27 of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for still listening at an hour and 5 minutes into this episode. I really, really appreciate you. If you haven't done so yet, I really appreciate Apple Podcast reviews or leaving your thoughts or feedback or ideas on that Flipgrid that we talked about, or tweeting or Instagramming at #EDU Duct Tape. And I extra appreciate you telling friends and colleagues about the show so we could help other educators with EdTech and have the right mindset about how to go about EdTech in the classroom. Remember that Twitter chat calendar. There's a link in the show notes, but it's bit.ly/EDU duct tape calendar. You've got to get the capital letters correct, so check in the show notes for that, but that'll help you be a part of all the Twitter chats. I hope you'll be with us next week on the 25th at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we talk about today's episode. Also, thanks again to the Mighty Ducts, who I named earlier in the episode and who are listed in the show notes. Sign up for my newsletter so you don't miss any episodes or Twitter chats or new GIFs on my website or anything like that at jakemiller.net/newsletter. And as always, thank you so much for being a duct taper. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. Go have a great day and go do great things in your classroom like I know you will.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please consider rating and reviewing the show on your favorite podcast app. #EduDuctTape.